There were cheers and jeers in New York City this week after a federal judge ruled that stop and frisk is unconstitutional and that it violates the rights of thousands of people. But in America's largest city, the top cops say stop and frisk saves lives. Let's have a look at the latest news.
New York City's stop and frisk policy has incurred much criticism over the past decade. This morning, a federal judge ruled that the NYPD deliberately violated the civil rights of tens of thousands of New Yorkers.
The New York Police Department has engaged in a widespread pattern and practice of unconstitutional, suspicionless stops and frisks and systemic racial profiling.
At least 200,000 stops were made without reasonable suspicion, and mostly men of color were intentionally discriminated based on race.
I'm just really thankful for the people that believed in us, that we weren't making up these stories, we didn't fabricate anything, we came to the table and said this is our experiences, and we're speaking for millions of other people that are going through the same thing in this city.
According to New York Civil Liberties Union, more than 4 million people have been stopped. 9 out of 10 people stopped were totally innocent. 87% of those stopped or frisked were either black or Hispanic. Only 6% were arrested, and less than 2% possessed a gun or contraband.
Stop and frisk!
4 men sued the NYPD in 2004, saying they were unfairly targeted because of their race.
Stop and frisk!
And hundreds more protested on the streets of New York against the policy. This class action suit was the largest and most broad legal action against the nation's biggest police department.
It is stopping us from getting jobs, it is stopping our productivity in our communities, and it's stopping us from being positive forces.
While thousands of New Yorkers and minorities across the nation are celebrating the judge's call for reforms,
we didn't believe that we were getting a fair trial.
New York Mayor Bloomberg said he would appeal the decision.
We welcome our new panel of experts. Dee Dee Benkie, thanks for sticking around. Dr. Tibbs, Associate Professor of Law at Drexel University, writer and culture critic Brother Dash, and joining us via Skype from University of Pennsylvania is Kirk James, who works on the Gold Ring Reentry Initiative. Thanks again for being with us, everybody.
Thank you.
I want to just get everybody's opinion of this stop and frisk. And when you heard the ruling, what was your initial thoughts? Dee Dee, we'll start with you.
Terrible, because I think it definitely protects New Yorkers. It's a good policy, and I think it's unfair for it to be struck down. I think it's working. The police department, they do a great job for New York to be so safe. I mean, I think they're doing something right, so let them continue to do so.
And in fact, New York City does have some of the lowest crime rates that they've ever seen. Dr. Tibbs, your thoughts?
So I don't think that you should try to lower crime rates at the expense of people's constitutional rights. I think that we are born with constitutional rights in this country. The Fourth Amendment says you have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures under the Constitution, and as a result of that, the police practice by the NYPD was unconstitutional, the way that they were applying it. And so my reaction to the ruling is that I think is absolutely the correct ruling under the rule of law, and I think was the best thing that could have happened.
Brother Dash?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised. I think in this political climate, for the judge to make the ruling that she did was courageous, and also she applied the law. We are a country of laws, and she applied the law as it should have been applied. And as someone who has been stopped multiple times, has never been arrested, it really hit home for me. I mean, I'm in double digits now in terms of the number of times that I've been stopped by the police, which is ridiculous. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how we proceed from here.
I want to hear about your personal.
Sure.
So hold on one second. We want to check in with Kirk James via Skype. He's at the University of Pennsylvania. Your thoughts when you heard the ruling, Kirk?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that it took us so long to get to this point. I mean, we have a policy that's essentially not based on any empirical research. I mean, we all want safer streets, right? But stop and frisk, we know, is not the way to go. The majority of people stopped and profiled are people of color. I mean, the numbers just don't support the policy. Last time I think I was on the show, I said we were making a false correlation, meaning that the crime rates across the country have been falling nationally for years, right? And there's a lot of states that don't utilize stop and frisk that have lower crime rates. So even before Bloomberg came to office, we saw the crime rates, the violent crime rates specifically, falling in New York City. So essentially, we're trying to make something work or fit a mold that it really does not.
I want to talk about, Brother Dash, I want to talk about some of your personal experiences. But I want to ask, the crime rate in New York City, there's no arguing that it has gone down. Mayor Bloomberg, Ray Kelly, the police commissioner all say that stop and frisk does work and that it actually saves lives. They've actually said a number of 7,000 people. Dee Dee, I start with you. And how do you substantiate taking it away then?
I don't understand. I mean, if it's suspicious behavior, so be it. I mean, who's to say it's race? You don't know that. I mean, it just depends what's going on at the time. So, you know, I don't understand why it's wrong to stop someone if it's suspicious behavior, whether they're black, white, Asian, or whatever. I think it's a deterrent. It's working. Something's working, and that's a big part of their program. And not only that, I mean, when we go to the airport, we're all stop and frisked. I mean, they're checking all of us. I mean, it happens all the time. And I wouldn't mind it. Go ahead, check and, you know, stop and frisk me. Because what it does is a deterrent for neighborhoods where there's a lot of crime, and I think we should let the police department do what they've been doing because it's working.
Well, that's precisely the problem. It's not happening to all the neighborhoods where there perhaps might be criminal activity. Yes, I do.
No.
I mean, actually, we don't have bands of white men saying, look, we're being unreasonably stopped and frisked in the United States by the police. This is a problem that is affecting minorities in major ways. And actually what the law says is that you can't stop someone because of suspicious behavior. You have to only be able to point to objective, reasonable activity that they are engaging in that's criminal activity. It's not just you look suspicious, we get to actually stop you. You have to point to something that amounts to actual criminal activity.
Dee Dee pointed to going to the airport, and we're all stopped and frisked at the airport. So it sounds like you're in favor of being stopped and frisked in your own neighborhood.
Yeah,
then,
I am.
And that's great.
I am.
Then,
do
then,
it.
Then
I would
let's
love to
do
be
it.
stopped and
Then
frisked.
let's.
I want everyone
I
to
think
be.
but that's not what the statistics show.
and that's not what's
NYPD's
happening.
own statistics show that only 9% of those who were stopped were people who were white. The majority have been black and Latino and between the ages of 14 and 24. And I think that if you were to have Wall Street executives being stopped on their way to work, if you were to have soccer moms being stopped on their way to taking their kids to soccer practice or grocery store, whatever have you, in a rampant fashion as it has been done across the country for years, I think you would have a totally different narrative coming out of those who support people like Bloomberg.
And don't forget
Let's check in with Kirk.
too.
Let's check in with Kirk James right now, and you know, the Ray Kelly has come out when asked that question that you just asked, Brother Dash, and he has said that they targeted people in areas where there was the highest crime.
Well, to add to that, I think even to what Dee Dee just said, and you know, we're constantly trying to make this correlation between stop and frisk and violent crime. You know, the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, as well as the New York City Police Department statistics, say that less than 11% of people stopped and frisked are in relation to violent crime. So, you know, most of the people that are being stopped and frisked, it's not even pertaining to, you know, a crime per se, it's more pertaining to the color of their skin, as we're seeing that the majority of people stopped and frisked are Hispanic and Latino young men between 14 and 24.
Well, what about my safety versus your rights? How do we get the world and get this dialogue to come together? How do we start opening up this conversation and figuring this out? I'll start with you, Brother Dash.
Well, I mean, we always have this debate. I mean, this debate has been going on since colonial times, where you've had this debate between liberty and safety. You know, your rights versus the safety of the community, you know, at hand, and that's always going to be something that we grapple with. But we can easily just let's keep it focused on NYPD stop and frisk. What are their own statistics telling you? And by their own statistics, this is a failed policy. And then we're not also discussing the human element of it. I mean, we just had an interview recently with Questlove from The Roots. And Questlove talked about how he is now 40 plus years old, and he has been stopped and frisked almost 30 times in his life. And he recounted about how that makes him feel, especially when he recounted an instance of being stopped and humiliated when he was on a date with someone, and the police officer just basically emasculated him, having him spread out on the floor and talking to him in all sorts of ways. And now he has to relate to his date in a particular way where I don't feel like a man anymore. And we're not even talking about the human element of how does that make people feel.
Let's talk about that human element right now. You talked about some of your personal experiences, Brother Dash. Can you just share one of your experiences?
Well, one of the experiences I had, one of my first experiences is when I was a freshman at Rutgers University. And I was with a friend of mine, one of my best friends in college, and we were in Newark, New Jersey. So we weren't even in New York City, but we were in Newark, New Jersey.
Sure.
And we were stopped by 2 police officers who, threw us against the wall, patted us down, very, very belligerent, very rough handling, and we're thinking, hey, we're college students. We're at one of the top public universities in the country. I was at Rutgers University on an academic scholarship, and here I am being treated as if I'm a criminal. Now, it was a wake-up call for me because it showed me, hey, you're suspicious by the color of your skin and you're a male. It doesn't matter what your accomplishments are. It doesn't matter what your education is. So it was a wake-up call for me, but also I think it is a condemnation, in my view, of the police departments that we have in this country. And you will find this same story in rural, urban, suburban communities around the country. Why do we have black people in this country, no matter where you go, who can all tell the same story?
And I know, Dr. Tibbs, you shared your personal story
Sure.
as well last
Sure.
week, and thank you for sharing that, very much for sharing your personal experience.
Absolutely.
But how, if we go back to just the statistics, that the crime rate is so much lower in New York City, and many of the top cops are attributing it to this program working.
Well, I mean, you can't really point to that correlation, right? Because crime has been dropping, and you can't specifically say that it is the end result of stop and frisk, right? That's what the problem is with the NYPD and the way that they're being held accountable. But here's the thing for me, the thing that I don't understand is what's wrong with the police being accountable for not violating people's constitutional rights? Why is that something that we find so strange and so outrageous and something that we have to actually take up in the interest of a massive debate? This is exactly what we should want. The idea behind the police and policing is that they should want to protect and serve. That's their motto, protect and serve, but not at the expense of constitutional rights. And it's not just that they stop and frisk. I think the larger problem is how do they treat people in the context of that stop and frisk. This is where police brutality comes from. It sneaks in, it creeps in, the name calling, the rough handling, the pressing,
But let's
the
not
beating.
forget that 30% of the NYPD is Hispanic and also African American.
And I don't think anyone wants what you're talking about. It's
But
not
that's
a
what
bad policy,
happens.
but there are bad cops. The bad cops should be fired. Look, but you get treated that way, they should be out. I don't think anyone thinks that bad cops should be on the street, but there are a lot of good ones. And the NYPD, they do a great job. And as far as constitutional rights and as far as our liberties, I want to be protected. And when I talk about suspicious behavior, I mean suspicious criminal behavior. Someone is at my place, my apartment, beating the door down, acting like a fool, and they're saying, hey, I'm going to come in and take you out or something. Well, I want the cop to come in. I mean, to me, that's suspicious behavior.
I agree, but you don't need stop and frisk for that, right? That's a
Yeah, I
violation
do. I want to
of,
stop and frisk.
No, actually, that's harassment, and you have probable
I'm being
cause to
harassed.
make an
Yeah,
arrest.
well, that's what I mean.
But I'm saying the police don't need stop and frisk for that type of an outcome.
Let me check in with Kirk. He's up there smiling up there. You have a better solution there, Kirk.
Well, I think we all want safe streets, right? We all can agree we want safe streets. But I think to maybe answer your first question is that we really need to be having informed conversations that aren't based on how I feel, how you feel, but conversations that are based on really unbiased research. And all the research really points that this does not work. I think in less than 0.2% of all stops, a weapon is found. But yet this policy continues to kind of increase without research to even validate it. And I think, again, to say this again, nationally, all research shows that violent crime has fallen throughout the nation. It was falling in New York City before we even instituted stop and frisk. So I think, again, we're trying to make something out of nothing. This is a policy that dehumanizes. It creates a level of distrust between police and communities that are probably irreparable. So I think we're creating, we're putting ourselves in a situation that could have really bad outcomes.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to continue our discussions on stop and frisk and turn our discussions to Eric Holder. The U.S. Attorney General once said Americans were cowards on the issue of race. We'll talk to our panel about those comments when we come back.